Good afternoon. If you're here in California, welcome to Alta Live. I'm going to wait a couple of seconds as our audience fills in. Again, this is Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta Journal's digital editor, and I am so excited to welcome all of you to today's very interesting, a little bit haunting, but fascinating episode of Alta Live. So the topic today is a cold case out of Ventura County in Southern California. I am very excited to welcome today's guest. Steve Rhods is a former Ventura County Sheriff's deputy. He was a sergeant with the Sheriff's Department, and he's currently an investigator for the Ventura County District Attorney's Office. In his storied career, Steve has been instrumental in helping to identify numerous suspects, including the infamous Golden State Killer. Louise Farr is an award-winning Alta contributor, and she's a book author. If you're an Alta reader, you will know Louise's work from her amazing article, The Accident, following a tragic death along the Pacific Crest Trail. In her latest for Alta, She Has a Name, this follows Steve's search to identify two murder victims and the person who killed them. While Steve and his team have made extraordinary progress, one victim remains unknown. We will talk about her, now known as Jane Doe Ventura County, today. Also, genetic DNA testing. We've gotten some emails asking to talk about that, and the complexities of solving old cases with both new technology and legwork. Before we begin, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with us, Alta Journal is an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We have a website, we do these weekly series, we've got tons of great newsletters I encourage you to subscribe to. We host a monthly California book club. If you enjoy what we do here today, I hope you'll check us out at altaonline.com. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions of both Steve and Louise. We'll chat for about 30 minutes today and then get to as many of your questions as possible. This interview is being recorded and will be posted to altaonline.com later today. We're also going to shoot you an email with links to that, Louise's article, information about who to contact if you have tips for the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, as well as anything else that comes up today. So please keep an eye out for that. As we kick it off, I like to ask everyone to start the chat by letting us know where you are zooming in from today. I'm in Novato, California, up here in Marin County. Welcome, Steve Rhods and Louise Farr. Let's begin. Steve, where are you today?
I'm in Camarillo, California.
And Louise, where are you coming to us from?
I'm in Valencia, California.
Welcome, welcome Salem, Oregon, Riverside, Ontario, Canada, Sherman Oaks, Mark from Cupertino. This is great. LA, a lot of LA. So excited. Ukiah. Hi, Uncle Ted from Ukiah. So let's kick it off. Louise, let's begin with you, because you're the one who introduced this story to us. Can you kind of briefly tell us how you found this story, how you came to decide to write about this story, and give us the Cliff Notes version of what happened in 1980 through kind of today, where we stand right now?
Well, I came across the story when I read about the trial of Wilson Schuest, who is the killer. That happened in 2018. And when I read about the murder of these two unknown women, I was just blown away once I learned about Steve Rhodes' relentless pursuit of justice, and also the prosecutor, John Barrick, who took both cases on when nobody else wanted to. I just felt that it was a completely inspiring story when everything is so chaotic and dark at the moment. While the story itself was dark, the people involved with it were really, really looking out for the good of everybody in this case.
And so the case that we're talking about is were both bodies found in 1980. There were two young women who were found in Southern California, one in Kern County and one in Ventura County.
Yes, within days of each other. And both crimes were very similar. They'd both been stabbed. They'd both been tossed out of a car, not murdered at the scene. They were unidentified. And that made authorities reluctant to pursue the cases because no relatives came forward to claim them.
Both appeared to be women of color, either Latina or
yes, either Latina or Native American.
And one was about 5 months pregnant.
Yes, Jane Doe Ventura was 4 to 5 months pregnant.
Jane Doe Ventura County, and she is the woman who we are hoping to eventually identify so that her family can be notified. One thing to note about Jane Doe Ventura County, which really touched me, and in fact, Louise ends her article with a quote from Steve that she had had the autopsy revealed that she had had a child previously. I was born in 1978, so I can't help but think that this child is out there somewhere who's about my age, wondering whatever happened to their mom. Steve, what about this case hooked you? When did you get involved in this case? Because you left the sheriff's department in 2012 and you became an investigator for the DA in 2013. So can you talk a little bit about the beginning of your work on this case and where you stand now?
Well, I've always known about this case. When I was with the sheriff's department, I supervised a homicide crew. And so I had reviewed the case a few times. So I've known about it. And the cold case unit in 2005 had worked it a little bit. When I retired and was preparing to come back, going through the background checks and so forth, I received a call from a coworker telling me to hurry up. They'd gotten a DNA cold hit on a suspect from the DNA collected from Jane Doe Ventura's clothing. And so when I returned back to the cold case unit, we picked it up and started working it. I've always cared about the victims of the cases I've handled and their families. And this one is no different. I just feel like I need to identify her and allow her to return home to her family. I can't believe there is some child, some mother, some places wondered what became of their daughter 40 years ago.
She would have been about 65. She appeared to be in her 20s in 1980. And so this case, were you assigned this case? Do you get to pick which cold cases you work on?
We picked them based on solvability, and that is based on physical evidence, such as DNA is the big thing. Because we can go right to the evidence. So when I'm reviewing a case for cold case investigation, I rarely read the circumstances of the investigation. I just go right to the evidence and see what evidence is there that we can work with today. And this one, the work had been done prior to my leaving. Just as I was retiring from the sheriff's department, I had my team submit the clothing from Jane Doe Ventura for DNA examination. And then I left the sheriff's office. And so 3 months later, the return had come back, identifying Wilson Shuest as a suspect.
And he was already incarcerated for other rapes.
That's right. He's a serial rapist from the Visalia area of California.
God, Visalia. We should also mention that your work, particularly with DNA, was instrumental in capturing the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo, who was a prolific rapist and killer all up and down the Golden State, who was captured only a few years ago. Can you tell us how you there's the DNA we all know from, I mean, if you're like me watching true crime shows or Law and Order or whatever. But now law enforcement officers or investigators are able to utilize DNA and match it with sites like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, where regular folks like me have submitted my DNA. I want to see how much Italian I am, to kind of follow a family tree. How does that work? And does 23 or sites like 23andMe or Ancestry allow you to do that now?
Well, I currently have 3 cases I'm doing genealogy on. And we don't lie to anybody about anything. I'll call you up because I think you're related to my suspect distantly, and I'll explain to you all of that. And I'll ask you if you would be willing to submit a test kit from a commercial DNA case like 23andMe or MyHeritage or whatever. And I load it into their database under your name. And once the results come back, and I explain to you, this is yours, this belongs to you, I'm just paying for it. And once it's all done, you can do with it whatever you want. I just want the data out of it so I could put it into GEDmatch, which I kind of call the Facebook of genealogy. Because everybody else is uploading into GEDmatch to see how close they are in relation to each other. And I follow those top matches to create a family, your family tree, to see if you line up as a cousin or a sister or whatever to my suspect. But
you've been able to, with Jane Doe Ventura County, you've been able to trace her DNA to identify her great grandparents.
We have, yes.
Which is extraordinary.
I personally have not done that. I reached out to the DNA Doe Project, and they're doing the majority of the research in this case. I'm simply knocking on doors when they're not getting answers on the phone.
Is the reason that you've, I don't know, connected with this case, or I mean, obviously Louise's article really centers on it, and your passion for this project, was it the solvability of it? Or are you just determined that this is one you can solve? Is there something more personal about Jane Doe Ventura County and Jane Doe Kern County, who was eventually identified as, through this kind of genealogy, you were able to, your team was able to track the DNA to a specific town in Canada, post on the community Facebook page and find her niece and finally give her a name, which was Shirley Soucy. But what about these particular women attracted you, or these crimes attracted you to this case?
I think it's just unfinished work. I just felt like everybody has a mother, and every mother always wonders where their children are at. What are they doing? And I just felt like that answer needs to be answered. So I'm simply trying to return these girls back to their families, and explain this is what happened, and we sought justice and got justice for them. It's not a closure, never will be, but that's really all it is. It's unfinished work.
So the DNA has identified Wilson Shuest Jr. as the killer, now convicted killer of both Jane Doe Ventura County and Shirley Soucy. We simply don't know who Jane Doe Ventura County is, and that's what we want to find out. Before we look at pictures, both of Shirley and a recent artist rendering of what Jane Doe Ventura County likely looked at, Louise, can you tell us, you've written so much about true crime, about kind of tragic, haunting stories, but you speak so much about coming across a person like Steve Rhods. What about him stands out from your average investigator or law enforcement officer or cold case solver?
Well, I've actually been aware of Steve Rhods, but probably 10 years ago, probably even longer than that. Even though I hadn't met him at the time, he was involved in another case that I was interested in. And I had read an incredible interrogation that he and his then partner, Joe Evans, did of a 19-year-old suspect who claimed innocence at first, and by the end of the interview had confessed, essentially. And I kind of tucked it away in the back of my mind. And then when I heard that Steve Rhods was associated with this case, it made me even more interested because I knew what kind of detective he was. And I contacted him through the prosecutor, John Barrick, And they were absolutely incredible in helping me write this article. They were completely unstinting with their time. I mean, I just can't thank them enough.
Do you find that that's often the case, that people are willing to communicate with a journalist, particularly one who's doing kind of a longer?
No. I don't find that's often the case. I was very lucky in this case. They want to find Jane Doe Ventura. They weren't doing it for their egos.
Right.
And I think that's what started the whole thing. And then they just didn't hold back, either of them, which was wonderful. I mean, you're so used to interviewing people who say, I don't really want to answer that question, or, well, this is off the record. But they were just fantastic. I couldn't have asked for any better subjects, honestly.
Let's take a look at these women. Louise, why don't you tell us a little bit about Shirley, and then Steve will look at Jane Doe Ventura County, if that works.
Yes.
Beep, boop, bop, boop, beep. This is my sound of beginning. So this is Shirley.
Yeah, Shirley Soucy was from the Samson Cree Nation in Canada. She had a troubled background. She had left home to work as a domestic in Vancouver, and she had 2 children. And according to her niece, Violet, her vindictive partner had turned her into the child welfare authorities. Her children were taken away from her, and she turned to drugs and alcohol. A remaining mystery about Shirley is, what was she doing in California? Violet Soucy spent years searching for her in Seattle and in all over Canada, largely Vancouver. How did she get to California? What was she doing here?
It's just, it humanizes her to see, you know, her cool
She's beautiful.
glasses, her beautiful, kind of stylish.
Yeah, and that liveliness in her face too. To think that she met a horrible end like that is just so heartbreaking. If both these women, they went out for the evening, not knowing what the evening would bring, but they did not expect what happened to them. You know, Shirley, they were both nicely dressed, Shirley in a pink blouse and little white tennis shoes. And it's tragic. It really is.
Now we're going to look at, this is a recent, as of last year, artist rendering of what Jane Doe Ventura County likely looked like when she was alive in 1980. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct.
How did your artist develop this?
Carl Koppelman from the DNA Doe Project created this rendering, and he used some crime scene photos. And this is probably the closest resemblance that I've seen of her in all of the drawings that have been done over the years. That's how he does this.
And so is this being, what do you do to get this out now, 41 years later, almost 42, 41 and a half years later? What's the plan? What do we do with this photo?
Well, I've been distributing it. I've been distributing it to news agencies. I've been pleading with folks like yourselves and Louise to please make it public. That's really the closest I can get. This is what she looked like in 1980, not what she looks like today.
Right, she's dead.
So now we have to rely on someone who knew her in 1980 to say, hey, yeah, she does look familiar to me. And that's the real problem.
Now, are you allowed, I don't want to push you too far, but are you allowed to reveal any DNA results on the 5 or 4 months along the fetus that she was carrying?
So she was about 4 months pregnant with a little baby boy. We took a DNA sample of the fetus. The Doe Project created a profile, and they identified the father of this infant. And the father lived in the downtown Los Angeles area around Westmoreland. And we interviewed him. He denies impregnating anybody. We've showed him photographs of our victim. He claims he does not know her. does not recognize her. And that's really as far as I've gotten. So I know that his name is Rene. I can't give his last name, but he lived in the Westmoreland and 9th Street area of Los Angeles, and then later up closer to MacArthur Park in downtown LA. And ever since West was convicted, we were operating on the theory that Jane Doe Ventura was kidnapped off the streets in Visalia. I now believe that she came from Los Angeles. And I believe what West did was he kidnapped Shirley in Hanford, where he lived, dropped her in Bakersfield in Kern County, continued to Los Angeles, where he found Jane Doe Ventura, and left her at Westlake High School before driving back to Hanford, all in a 3-day period.
Do you think that the reason that Renee isn't talking, I mean, maybe this was a one-night stand and we've all, he was drunk, whatever. But do you think that the reason Renee might say he doesn't remember is because he's concerned that he will be charged with this crime, despite West being convicted and in jail for it?
Yes, I believe that he thinks I'm lying to him. He thinks I'm going to arrest him for this girl's murder. And even though I've told him no, that we know who did it and that person is in prison.
Can I just ask dumb, obvious questions here? Can't you put like something legal, like we swear, Renee, it's in writing, there is no way you will be convicted for this crime. We just want to give her family we want to find her family and alert them. You don't think he's gonna, is there a way to do that, to just, we grant you immunity, Renee?
I haven't considered that. He's in the New York area. I'm in California. COVID, it just makes traveling and communicating very difficult.
I feel like Renee knows. I mean, come on. Now, once this is solved, Steve, do you have another, how many of these are you working on at once? Is there another Jane or John Doe that is pinned to your dry erase board that is next, or do you have another one that's ongoing? How does it work?
Yes, I have actually a list of about 14 does in Ventura County that have died suspiciously. They're unidentified. We don't know who they are. Because we don't know who they are, we don't know how they died. Some of them are skeletal remains, but there's 14 and that list is growing when I find time to work on it. But I'm currently working on a 1980 double murder through genealogy. And that's taking a lot of my time right now.
Do you only do cold cases?
We only do cold cases.
I mean, that is very cool. I think because obviously it's kind of ideally finding some closure and putting to bed a lot of long held pain and but also there's been a resurgence. There's been a huge burst in the popularity and interest around true crime. I myself have been hooked for a very long time, but in recent years, I credit a lot with Serial, the podcast Serial, with TV shows. People are really passionate and fascinated about true crime. In fact, SNL has a really funny sketch about a middle-aged woman's dream night at home, and it's watching horrible murders on TV. Guilty. Louise, can you talk a little bit about, you've been writing true crime for decades. Why, do you have any idea of why now it's become so popular?
I think it's because the world around us feels so dark and chaotic at the moment. Crime is chaotic and dark. These crimes usually involve murder, but we know going into them that there's going to be some kind of ending. It may not be a happy ending, but it will close off the story. It brings a sense of order, maybe, to a world that feels so disorderly. That's my only thought about that. Also, perhaps there's a clear line between good and evil, usually when we're reading or watching crime shows. The lines are not quite as blurred.
I think that one of the questions that we got is a question about missing white women syndrome, which is not really Steve's area of expertise. He simply solves the crime no matter who the victim is. It is case by case. But perhaps, Louise, you could just briefly explain what that is. It's a much larger conversation, I think, than we have time for today. And it is a conversation that's happening not only nationally in America, but globally. Can you please explain missing white woman syndrome?
Well, it's huge. The term was first coined by the journalist Gwen Eiffel, and it refers to the fact that the media in general is really only interested in pretty blonde women. If somebody else, a minority, a woman of color, goes missing, they consistently get far less print and airtime. And so there's far less likelihood for them to be discovered, or for their killers, if they in fact are dead, to be apprehended. I think now there's more attention being paid finally, but the statistics are pretty shocking. The statistics, of course, are all over the place, and I wouldn't even attempt to quote any at the moment because they vary so from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But it's a very troubling syndrome.
Certainly, and I think that we all can imagine that a dead, pregnant, white, blonde woman in 1980 would have been given a lot more attention than Jane Doe Ventura County got then.
And in 2010, 2020. Yeah.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. So Steve, do you feel, can you get a sense, and please do ask questions in the Q&A section, folks. We've got a few more minutes, so we'll grab as many of those as we can. Do you get a sense when you talk about the solvability of a cold case? Do you start to get a sense of when you're getting close to hitting that answer, solving the mystery? Do you have a spidey sense of it's going to happen?
About the time I sit down across the table from the defendant or the suspect and read him his rights, that's when I'm going to know.
That's when you know whether or not he did it. Just
if I can get in the room with him, that's the last of it. It's over. Once I have that interview, it's a matter of taking the case forward.
How so?
Explain how your DNA is on, in, or around this person. And the answer has always been the same. I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't there. And I'm happy with that. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Having a good day.
Because if they say that and there's Siemens all over them, you were clearly there.
Yes.
Can I ask, just because it's incredibly, we're getting lots of questions now. This is a great question. Jean asks, when does a cold case become a cold case? And what is the oldest cold case that's been solved to your knowledge, or in Ventura County, in your tenure?
Ventura County? I believe there was a robbery in Simi Valley in 1979 or 78. One of my partners worked it, and they found a suspect. They found DNA on a beanie that was left at the scene. And in 2010, I believe it was, they visited that suspect at a prison back east in Georgia, Tennessee, someplace like that. He was in federal prison, and interviewed him, left. That defendant killed himself, but we were able to corroborate the statements through his brother as that defendant's involvement.
Wow. So
you knew you were getting close when this guy's got a couple of years left in prison and he winds up killing himself.
I've got to ask about the Golden State Killer. Now, my first introduction, I really recommend, we will send you all a link to an LA Magazine piece by Michelle McNamara. That was my first introduction to the Golden State Killer. In fact, that piece was assigned by then managing editor of LA Mag, Mary Melton, who is currently our editor at large, and edited this piece that Louise wrote. But you helped discover DNA that eventually led to the identity of Joseph D'Angelo, who was the Golden State Killer. And you got to interview him. You were in the room with the real Golden State Killer. Again, a prolific, awful serial rapist and murderer. Did you know right away DNA aside, did you get the vibe this guy's a killer?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of killers. I don't get a vibe.
You don't?
They're killers, no.
It's not like you can look into their eye, like they have dead eyes.
No, they're just people walking through the supermarket next to you. They're no different.
That's what's scarier.
Um,
And so what was he, can you just give me a little, what was he like? What was it like to be in there? Obviously he was once he was captured, he committed most of his crimes in the late 60s and 70s, I think. But once he was captured, he was an elderly man and presented himself what seemed to me as even more elderly in the media. What was it like being in the room with him?
No different than anybody else. He was he was handcuffed to a table and he was staring at a wall in front of him and wouldn't make eye contact with us. Literally, I had to put myself right in front of him. And I just started talking to him. I knew he could hear me. He wouldn't respond, but he could hear me. And you could see kind of twitches and movement in his eyes and his facial features that indicated that the accusations I was making towards him were hitting a nerve. It was leaving the room that everything changed because he started talking to himself out loud. And I put on some headphones and I was monitoring what he was saying, and myself and other investigators were taking rapid notes. And he, in essence, he confessed to what he did to himself.
Under his breath?
Well, it wasn't under his breath because we could hear it.
And all that's admissible. That is a
He was
confession.
talking to an empty room. And I went back in later and I confronted him with some of those questions, like who Bonnie was,
Right.
you know, who made you do, he kept talking about, you made me do this. You're the reason why this happened. You know, I was weak, you know, and I kept asking him, well, who are we talking about here? And finally, in the end, my last conversation with him was coached on a medical history about his mental health. And does he take medication? Has he ever been diagnosed with a mental illness? Has he ever heard voices in his head? And of course, he denied all of these things, which undercuts the I'm a crazy defense.
Oh, sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if I could say that Steve Rhods' interrogation of the Golden State Killer reads like a Broadway play.
You opened the article with it. It's such a great opening.
But the whole interrogation is just incredible. It's so dramatic.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to the sheriff's department in Sacramento. They did a wonderful job of tracking him and following him around. He wasn't the feeble old man we all saw on television. Just the day before his arrest, he's going 100 miles an hour down the freeway on a motorcycle. So he was quite capable of doing harm even at his age.
I could talk to you.
Sitting there catatonic was clearly an act, and his entire ride back to the station where he was interviewed, he never once asked the obvious question, what's going on? Why am I here? He never asked, not once. He knew the minute those investigators walked up to him that the time had come.
Louise, question for you. Vicky asks you to clarify a part of the article. I didn't understand in the article whether you went to breakfast with Shoe West and his daughter or only his daughter.
No, just, I didn't go to breakfast with anybody. Sorry, what?
Can you clarify? I don't even remember this part. Is this Steve?
Steve and his partner went to breakfast with Shoe West's daughter, hoping that she would be able to get her father to confess, but it didn't happen.
She wouldn't. So it was Shoe West was not at the IHOP.
Shoe West was not at the cafe drinking mimosas with.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Bob asks, how often do convicted murderers reveal more about the crime once they've been convicted and their appeals are over? Do they suddenly just, once they've got nothing to lose, spill the beans?
This is the first time I've ever asked a convicted defendant what the real story is, and I'm not completely sure he told me the truth. He told me that he picked both girls up in the Hanford and Visalia area. What we're finding out about Jane Doe Ventura, it's not looking like she was ever in Visalia.
I feel that my spidey sense is saying that you're getting close to solving this, and that learning who Renee is going to be what finally puts you over the edge. Finally, Jean asks, is there a statute of limitation on murder? I feel qualified to answer this. That's a hard no, Jean. There's not. If we're out of time, and this, I really could talk to both of you all day. Louise, we should do a whole other panel on missing white women syndrome. This is so interesting. I just do want to let everyone know, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone has any information on this, they can contact the Ventura County Sheriff's Department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we will send you a link to that as well. I've got the phone number right here. The non-emergency line is 805-654-9511. But again, it's venturasheriff.org, and we'll send that info to everyone, as well as a recording of this interview, Louise's amazing article. I will find a link to that LA Mag piece. And I'm just so grateful to you, Steve, and to you, Louise, and a brilliant Alta contributor. Thank you so very much for taking the time today. To our audience, join us next week. We're going to talk about, we're really going to take a 180. We're going to talk about famed Judy Garland impersonator, Jim Bailey. Biographer Sam Wasson did an incredible, very personal piece on Jim Bailey in our current issue. And we're going to talk about him and his work. And he was so amazing that even Judy Garland was a fan. So please do join us for that next Wednesday at 12:30. Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Stay safe. Steve, stay safe. Good luck. We'll be following this. And Louise, thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth.
Take care.
Thank you, Steve.